Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. My guest on One of a Kind, Marc Moen, was named the 2003 Person of the Year by the Iowa City Press Citizen. His design influence and cultural contributions can be seen throughout downtown Iowa City. Marc is a lawyer, developer, landlord, philanthropist, and visionary. His story begins in Sioux City, Iowa, where he was born in 1953. Graduating from Iowa State with an undergraduate degree in sociology, Marc headed to law school at the University of Iowa, graduating with distinction in 1979. He then opened a law practice in Iowa City. Early on in his career, he started acquiring real estate, a duplex at a time. Currently, he and his partners own the recently opened Plaza Towers, over 100 apartments in the downtown area, including the Vogel House at Iowa Avenue and Lynn Street, the Whiteway building on Clinton Street. He also owns about 35 commercial spaces, including the Wells Fargo building on the Ped Mall and buildings on Burlington Street from Clinton down to West Bank. It wasn't a surprise to read that Marc retired from practicing law in 2003 to develop and manage the firm's properties. The Whiteway building was awarded the Chamber of Commerce Beautification Award. The Vogel House won the Iowa Division of the American Institute of Architecture Award for Design Excellence, which is a very special honor. In addition to his development projects, Marc and his partner, Bobby Jett, are involved in philanthropy, contributing to Riverside Theater, the Englert, the Community Foundation of Johnson County, WRAC, the Iowa Children's Museum, several schools, and their neighbor, the Iowa City Public Library. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you.
I said you were born in Sioux City, Iowa. Tell me a little bit about your family. Your parents are still in Sioux City?
My parents are in Sioux City in the summers, and they live in Sanibel Island in the winter. And they were just here in Iowa City. We're trying to talk them into moving to Plaza Towers.
And what do they think of
They
Iowa
loved
City?
it. They hadn't seen, they love Iowa City.
Do they?
Yeah. My dad is not in great health, and I think the Plaza Towers building would be great for him. But they've lived in Sioux City all their lives, so it's very hard.
And you and your older brother, correct?
I have a brother who's 4 years older.
And you both went through the schools in Sioux City. And I heard, this is a rumor, but there's got to be a story, that you were fired from your first job at 16. Is that true?
I was.
What happened? There's got to be a story in that.
I worked in a parking ramp, with my cousin. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, they had these belt elevators where you stood on a little platform and there was a big conveyor belt that went up to the top of the building. And somebody would come in for their car and you'd get their ticket, and we would race up this thing to get the cars, and then we would race the cars down the ramp and sometimes hit each other or hit a post or whatever.
What else would a 16-year-old do with a car, right?
So there were these little sort of fender benders, and we had a plunger and rubbing compound that we would take the dents out. And one weekend I was working, and the telephone company parked their cars there, a fleet of cars, and I couldn't get one started, and so I pushed it to the edge of the ramp and thought I would jump start it on the way down, and it got away from me and totaled the car.
Oh, gosh. No wonder you were fired. Now, did Mike get into these kind of issues of problems too, or was he pretty?
We were very different. Mike got in a fair amount of trouble, but it wasn't at work. He was in. Every weekend we would sort of look out the window to see what condition the car was in.
Your parents have had to go through some with two boys.
Amazing. They were just like, it was like, whatever.
What did your dad do?
He was always in sales. He was a route salesman for Old Home Bakery for many years, and then When I was in college, he was in, I don't remember exactly the year, but he was eventually got into real estate sales.
So you went to Iowa State and,
Iowa State.
and majored in sociology. And what turned you to law?
Well, you know, ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I always wanted to be a trial lawyer. And why that is, I'm not so sure, but maybe it was watching TV or something. But I just always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And so when the reason I majored in sociology, frankly, was I didn't do well in standardized tests, so I knew that I would have to have a very high grade point to get into law school. So I sort of kept switching majors until I found one that I could really excel in.
And
then I ended up studying, there was a professor, Dr. Roberts, I think his name was, at Iowa State, and I took every course he taught, and it was the study of cities. And we studied European cities, and we studied how cities grow and why they grow, why some cities in America sprawl out while cities in Europe tend to be, you know, centered. And it was, to me, just fascinating.
Do you think that maybe the seed was planted for this development that you were so involved in?
I always was interested in design, and always interested in both interior design and design of buildings. But I think the idea of groups and how they interact, which is what I studied, and why people live where they live and what's important to them was very interesting to me. And it was fascinating to me why when you would travel to overseas and you would see cities that were concentrated and then lots of open space. But here they were, and never quite understood why people kept sprawling out.
Well, your brother also has a bent for design. You showed me this book that his home won the place in the book 100 Best Houses, or some of the best houses in the world.
Right.
So the two of you have got this design bent in you, or
yeah, and I'm not sure exactly where that
came from. But you decided, though, after graduating, after putting that time in law school, that you started in practice. Did you go it alone, or did you join another?
You know, I was really fortunate. I clerked for John Nolan the first summer after my first year, which is unusual. Usually it's after your second year. And I clerked for him the whole time I was in law school, and then he hired me when I got out of law school. When I came to Iowa City, I had never been to Iowa City, and I thought all of Iowa was more like where I was from western Iowa. And so when I came here, I thought I was going to move on to a larger city. And I just fell in love with Iowa City, and many of my classmates, I think this is true today too, want to stay in Iowa City, and only a few of us have that opportunity. So I think I got really lucky and was hired here and never left.
And tell me about your partnership. You're in partnership to build these different buildings and own apartments. Tell me about your partnership and how this evolved.
Well, initially it was with my now ex-wife, Monica, who's still involved in all the real estate in Iowa City. And shortly after I graduated from law school, as soon as we were able to afford it, we wanted to invest. I mean, Iowa City seemed like a great place to invest in real estate, and it was an interest of ours. And we initially we would buy these places and fix them up ourselves. And my brother, who was older and more established financially at that time, was interested in Iowa City real estate as well, but more just from an investment point of view. So we started by buying a couple of duplexes over by City High, and we fixed them up and rented them, and that went fine, but we learned pretty quickly that really the key to this was the location, and that was to be right downtown. So we started buying up as much property around downtown as we could, and we ended up buying actually a group of duplexes and triplexes in one package that was being sold. So I think we ended up with something like 6 properties. These surrounded the downtown area. And then we had the opportunity to buy the Whiteway building. It was a gorgeous old building in the 200 block of Clinton Street, and it was owned by, I'm not exactly sure how many, but it was 2 or 3 or maybe more lawyers and maybe a doctor. And they were sort of trying to manage it, and they didn't really like doing that, and it needed some repair work. And so we partnered with the city on that project. At that time, there was a federally funded program to renovate buildings. And we shared in the cost of that, and that's when we really got started in a bigger way in development. And then at that point, we realized that the central business district was really where we wanted to be.
And this was the three of you, Monica, Mike, and you?
Right, and then my partner, I'm since divorced, and my partner Bobby Jett is now involved in the real estate too.
So for people who've been here a long time, White Way Building housed an incredible meat market.
Yes.
That's, everybody remembered
Right.
that. We love that. So
Right.
when did you buy the building next door that which you lived in on the upper floors? It's now houses Starbucks.
Well, we didn't, yeah, that was a more recent purchase,
Was that-
actually. We bought that building maybe 3 years ago. It was empty when we bought it. It had been an architect's office, and it was suites and treats, and it was a dental office, and most recently when we bought it, it was tanning. It was,
That's
both floors
right.
were tanning booths, tanning salon. And when I saw it, I just thought it would make an incredible loft apartment upstairs. And we had been working with Starbucks for a year and a half at that point, trying to find them a location in Iowa City. So it seemed like a natural to me. And
It's a wonderful space.
the architects did an amazing job. It's really a great space. I love living there. We did some things in that building, like the bathrooms and the kitchen we did as models for Plaza Towers so people could see what the finishes would look like. And then Bobby and I lived there until the tornado, which destroyed that apartment.
And you're going to redo
Yeah,
that?
it's being renovated now. We're able to keep Starbucks there even during the renovation, which is great.
Tell me also another award you received was for the Vogel House.
Right.
We were talking before the interview, there was a little controversy about this space. Give a little brief, kind of what went through to get to where we are now.
Well, the corner of Lynn and Iowa, which is where that building is there was an old house, beautiful old white brick house. It was, I think, painted brick, but it was I believe it was the last standing single-family residence in the downtown area, in the central business district. And it had been owned for many years by a local retailer who was originally going to put her shop there and then ended up putting it on Clinton Street when a store became available there. And she hung on to this space and basically used it as storage, but it hadn't been really maintained. And when I heard that she was interested in selling it, we looked at it actually for the purposes of renovating it. And that's another passion of ours. We really love modern architecture, but historic buildings too is something that we're really interested in, and that's how we got started. So we looked at it for that, and it had been so bastardized, I think, for so many years. There was nothing original left in the house, and the roof had so deteriorated that it really, in our opinion, couldn't be salvaged. We had a contractor look at it, we had the architects look at it, and the cost was prohibitive to renovate it. So we went to the strike preservation folks and told them what our plan was and said, if you think you want to try and save this, or somebody would want to save it, we'll bow out. But we just want you to know what we're thinking about doing. And it was I think it was a split vote, even vote on the commission about allowing us to take it down. So I think that was controversial to some extent. Although, as soon as that house came down, I think people pretty much forgot what was there. What was really controversial is what we put up. I had always wanted, ever since I was a little kid, I'd wanted to build a glass house. And so I told the architects that I really wanted to take that corner. It had gone from sort of this mundane corner, I thought, that wasn't very attractive, to when they did the development of Tower Place across the street, which won international awards for design. For parking, I mean, it doesn't look like a parking facility.
No.
It looks like it's wrapped in commercial space, a gorgeous building. Same architects that did Vogel House did that building.
Newman
Monson. And so, I went to them and I said, I really want a glass building. I mean, like wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling glass. And they had come back with designs that had, at least on Iowa Avenue, had windows maybe halfway up. And I said, no, I really am serious about solid glass. So they devised this curtain wall system where the two walls of the building are entirely glass.
and it's spectacular.
Well, thank you.
It's
Not
spectacular.
everybody thinks that.
I know, but I happen to like modern.
Yeah, I do too. And what we were mostly criticized for, I think, was some people just didn't like the building, period. But what the biggest criticism was how can you put down a 7-story glass building next to, you know, Bruegger's is on one side, the Van Patten House, which we also own, is on the other side, and those are historic structures, and how can you plunk this down? And, you know, my response has always been, number one, if you travel and just look, go to a big city or go to Europe and look at at the modern structures that are juxtaposed with ancient structures.
Absolutely.
And to me, they enhance each other. But that's a matter of taste.
Sure. And you told me before the interview that they're all filled.
Oh, they're all filled.
They're
That
all
was
filled.
the other criticism, is they're pretty pricey. They're small apartments. It's an expensive building to build, and people thought it would sit empty. And they also thought that it would be, they thought it was going to be really ugly, I think, because you can see in a lot, and that if there were all these apartments, you know. So, and what we did, and what I think people didn't realize at that point, was we furnished every apartment in that building. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so we have pretty strict restrictions in our leases as to what can be put in the windows. So if you look at any of our buildings, they all have a lot of glass, and you won't see different colored drapes. You won't see anything hanging in the windows.
Towels hanging out the
Right.
window. Right. Well,
It's
that's
all- we
good
do
to know.
all
I
the
didn't
window
know that.
treatments, yeah. And so, you know, there was a picture in the paper that somebody had painted a big ugly mistake on the fence around the building, and ultimately that building won the American Institute of Architects award
Which is,
for...
it's pretty special, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
big.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal for the architects. They
Sure.
did an amazing job. And interestingly, many of the people that vocally criticized, I mean, we're very vocal about the criticism, have now come around and love the building. There's one professor who wrote an editorial about it, against it, who now lives on one of the penthouses. Yeah,
Well,
he said he just absolutely loves it.
I'll tell you, that's
So there's an
sweet.
education process.
Absolutely.
You know, it's if it's different, and that's part, to me, to just do the same thing over and over, or to try and make a new building look old, it just doesn't do anything for me.
Was this a conscious thing that you, or is this just what's happening with your design in your buildings, that you are changing people's minds? Let's talk about the latest one, the Plaza Towers.
Well, it's a conscious decision to. I'm doing what I find attractive, but what I also know others won't find attractive, at least initially. And I think it's important to, and I don't know if it has to be controversial, but I think to sort of get everybody's juices flowing, you have to get them talking about it. And if you just do a mundane building that doesn't attract attention, you know, what's the point?
Well, I read in the paper that some longtime Iowa Citian said that the Plaza Towers was one of the best things that's happened to downtown Iowa City in the last 40 years. So, and you gave me a tour last week of the building, and of course, as I said, I love modern architecture. And so talk to the people who have not had a chance to go through the building. Let's talk about it from the top down,
Okay.
what you've done to that
Well,
space.
the important thing in developing residential spaces downtown is views and a lot of glass. I mean, that's what you're capturing. I think if you don't have a chance to get inside a building with those views, you don't realize how beautiful Iowa City is from that perspective. I mean, it's amazing. In every direction there are steeples, the university, and the whole downtown is lit. It's
and
like
from
a
the
Christmas
south
tree.
side, you can see the Iowa
You can see
River.
the Iowa River, the airport. I mean, these are gorgeous views, the gorgeous sunsets. And you don't realize, when you're at street level, you don't realize how dynamic the streetscape or the landscape is downtown.
So go up to the top floor, there are condos.
Yeah, it's all in threes. It's the first 3 levels are commercial, 1, 2, and 3. 4, 5, and 6 are luxury hotel rooms. 7, 8, and 9, initially at least, were apartments. And 10 on up or condos.
It's 14 stories.
It's 14 story. One wing is 14 and the other wing is 13 stories. And the top 2 floors in each wing are 2-story penthouses. And then there are a variety of sized condos and apartments as you go down.
You had a vision that this was, or I read someplace that you think of this as a community building?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, first of all, we couldn't do a building, and no private developer could do a building of that scale with those uses. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about in terms of the uses, without city participation or some incentive. It can't be done, I mean, financially. So I thought it was critically important that a grocery store be in that building. One, in order to get, the whole goal of that project was to attract adult permanent population so that we would have a diverse group of people living downtown. That helps retail. It also makes the city more dynamic, and it keeps the city vital. So we have, I mean, I've lived downtown since 2000, and it's a great experience, I think, living among students, because they have great sense of humor, they're active, they have great ideas, they have endless amounts of energy, and so it keeps you young, and it's just I mean, that's why a university town is so special. So you hear a lot of negative stuff about students, but what I tell people, and I think this is true, and I know everybody that lives in that building, they're living downtown not in spite of, but because of the students. So that was our goal, was to attract an adult permanent population. Well, the people that are going to want to live in urban areas don't want to live, they don't want to live downtown and then get in a car to go to the drugstore and to go to a movie and go to the theater and go to dinner and go to a grocery store and wherever. I mean, that's the whole point, is they want to live in an area where
you can walk to every place.
Everything's accessible and there's stuff going on. So no criticism, but you go to a city like Des Moines or Cedar Rapids or any number of cities that have actually come and asked us to do something similar in their cities. I mean, we're blessed with a university that wraps itself around downtown and a great relationship with the university, between the city and the university, and all these students. I mean, the city councils say, well, what's the secret? And the secret is a major university.
Yes.
And one where it's really integrated with downtown. Ames, where I went to school, the downtown and the university are totally separate entities. So
it's a partnership, is it not?
It's a total partnership, yeah. And so the goal was to get adult permanent population downtown. Things like the grocery store were a huge thing. And so we went to the city. That was the last piece of urban renewal ground. So we went to the city, asked them if they would sell it, and they opened it up for a request for proposals. And there were 4 serious proposals, 3 of which, ours and 2 others, were in the same $20 to $30 million price range. Very similar concepts. The city was, here's a piece of ground that sat for 25 years empty, and now there were 3 developers that wanted to do major projects. So the city was thrilled. And we went through a year-long, major, grueling selection process. And the grocery store was a big deal. I thought the hotel, if we could make it work, was a big deal because it's good for the city to have an upscale hotel.
Oh, and the rooms are so classy.
Thank you. And it was important. One of our competitors was doing a hotel, more of a standard garden variety hotel, very similar rooms to the Sheraton. Nothing critical of the Sheraton, but to plunk down another 200-room hotel offering the sort of same thing that the Sheraton was offering seemed to me a mistake. And we went to the Sheraton and said, what would you think if we added 50 or 60 rooms to the stock, but something different than what you have? And they thought it was a great idea.
And then you've had a partnership with
them
with the health club, correct?
Right. Yep. We took over the health club in that building a year ago, August, and renovated it. What I wanted was a connection to their building because I didn't want to deal with a swimming pool in Plaza Towers. And so I told them I wanted a connection, and would they agree to that? It would increase the traffic in their building. It would allow the guests in their building over into Plaza Towers easily. And they said if we would take over and renovate that club, they would give us the connection. So we did that. Put the club out. We were going to put a health club in our building anyway, so what we did was we split the club. It was a 6,000 square foot club in the Sheraton, and we added another 6,000 feet in Plaza Towers with a connection.
So we have a theme going here of good health.
We have a theme of good health, and the grocery store is a natural and organic food store.
And then the restaurant next door.
The restaurant is a Japanese restaurant which will open in July, and that is Japanese fondue, for lack of a better term. It's called shabu shabu, this type of cooking. And you cook at your table in a natural broth, no oil or grease cooking, so it's very healthy. And there's a sushi bar there as well.
That'll be
And then
nice.
upstairs is East Wind. It's a holistic healing center with massage therapy, psychotherapy, acupuncturist, chiropractor, nutritionist. That's all in the building.
So what was the biggest challenge to get the Plaza Towers built? Or did you have, or just, was it just a series of big issues?
The biggest, I mean, the biggest challenge and the biggest hurdle was our financing fell apart right before construction was to start. We had a letter of commitment and the bank backed out, and I mean, it was devastating. We had made, the city had selected our project over others. I had made public promises about this building and what we were going to do, and we were at the 11th hour with no financing. And I mean, we scrambled and struggled. It took several months to find a lender. Nobody locally would touch it, and
they could not get their arms around this concept.
No.
So you had to go out of
of
the city.
Yeah, we had banks from New York and Chicago and everywhere looking at it, and Tim Dwight, who was always interested in the project, had a friend who he had played ball with, I think in Denver, who was now a mortgage broker. And I had shipped this out to umpteen mortgage brokers, and nobody could do anything.
So who did finally?
Well, this guy named Darren Fisk, who's a mortgage broker, I sent it to him, and I swear, within 48 hours, he called me. We had this huge package. He said, I think I've got the bank that would be interested in this. It was in Madison. And 24 hours later, he had the bank president in our office who committed on that day. I mean, it was amazing. It's a very interesting concept. It's a syndication of local community banks, small banks. And I think it's either 39 or 49 banks that participated in that loan. So they all put a little money in. No great risk on anybody's part, the banks.
Really stressful time, wasn't that?
That was a terribly stressful time.
You just kept running and jogging.
Well,
and
it was
working
just,
out.
I mean, it was, you'd get up in the morning and you'd just start beating, trying to find somebody to help you with it. And
But it.
so anyway, that worked out.
And
Then the other tough parts were negotiating the hotel. Finding a grocer is near impossible. And we got, I mean, this guy's been in the grocery business since he was a child. And
He's from Des Moines.
he's from Des Moines, Bob Tate and his wife Joan. And I met with them maybe a year or 8 months before we were done with the building. And he loved the project. He loved the location. He loved Iowa City, but he was absolutely bound and determined to do Des Moines first. And a couple months later, he came back, and so the timing just wasn't going to work. We had to have somebody ready. He came back a couple months later, and he said, I can't find a developer in Des Moines who gets what a draw a grocery store is. And grocery stores don't pay market rent. I mean, they can't. And that's one of the things I'm saying is that you can't put a use like a grocery store and all the common spaces and the large lobbies that don't generate income. You can't do that kind of a building without. I mean, if it's all funded by a private developer, you can't devote that kind of space. You just can't do it. I mean, in convention space, that's everybody knows that's not a huge moneymaker.
Right.
You can't take the risk on a hotel. There's just a lot of things you can't do if you have to generate income from every inch of that building. So that's a long answer to your question.
That's right.
But the question was, you had read that I viewed it as a community building, and we've always wanted it to have that feel. We have a skywalk going over to the parking ramp that comes through the center of the building and then down, and that's intended as a main thoroughfare from the parking ramp to the library.
And that is, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but especially for young mothers and fathers with children who come to the library, who have to park over there, it's been such a fine addition.
Good.
They love going over the bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, and so
Well, it's kind of a cool bridge. It's not your standard.
No, but it's like a community that, you were almost in partnership with a library.
Well, we were, and the library was so supportive of this project. And
well,
they
you look
could
out.
have,
I was at the community or your conference center looking at the library fundraiser and looking over at the library. It was
what a magnificent building the library is.
Absolutely. So
that was, and we made a commitment to the city and to the library that walkway through the building would always be open during the hours that the library is open.
That was such a great idea. Well, I got so many questions to ask you, and a real quick, you can just give me a quick answer. Was it difficult to retire from your law practice? No, done that.
No,
done
25
that.
years of that was
that
enough.
plenty?
I loved it for the first 15 years, and I got burned out.
And then you just got burned out. So
it wasn't good for me.
On to your next chapter. Yeah. I always ask my guests the question of looking back on your short life. I think you're probably the second youngest person I've had on my show. Who or what has had a major influence on you? I always ask this question.
Well, this is probably a cliche, but my parents were a huge influence on me. And we didn't have a lot of money, and they made it clear, ever since I can remember, that college was, that it wasn't an option, it was just you're going, and we're paying for it. And that was hard for them. And my brother, they did the same. And the other thing they did, and God knows why or how, but they as I was a terrible student. I had a reading disability. I failed first.
Were you dyslexic?
Yeah, I'm dyslexic, and I also I read very, very slowly. And so, like, law school was a huge investment of time. While everyone else was doing whatever you do socially, I'd spend almost all night reading just to keep up. And even, my mom knew and my dad knew ever since I was in grade school that I wanted to be a lawyer, and that's what I was going to be. And flunking, didn't matter, flunking first grade, getting D's in high school. It was just like oblivious to all that. And they made my brother and I both feel like we could.
You could do anything if you set your mind. Aren't they proud of you?
Well, they are, and I'm very proud of them. They're really something special.
That's wonderful. Now, someone told me that you are a really hands-on owner, that you and, Autumn, your dog, yours and Bobby's dog.
We got arrested, did you know that?
Your dog did?
Well, I got arrested.
Oh, you got arrested?
For having Autumn on the pedmal.
Oh, okay, well, there you go, okay.
I tried to explain,
we won't even go there.
I tried to explain to them I can't get from my house to my office without going on the pedmal.
Oh, okay, so what?
Anyway, sorry.
Did they accept that?
No.
Oh, they didn't accept that. A rule is a rule.
That's right.
Rule is a rule. So, and I even hear you change light bulbs. That's what somebody said, that all of a sudden the owner, there was a light bulb out, and you came and changed it. And
I loved it. That sort of mindless stuff is real therapy for me.
You like that?
I do.
It doesn't sound like you have much spare time, but in your spare time, or when you have a minute to yourself, what do you like to do? Do you have any hobbies that?
I love to travel, and in the last 2 years I haven't had time to do that, but we're going to start doing that again.
And your favorite out-of-town city in the United States would be?
La Jolla.
Oh, La Jolla, okay.
Which is a great spot.
Yes.
And it's fun going down to Sanibel to see my parents. So I haven't been able to do that since this project started, but we're going to start doing that again.
You're going to start doing that. So,
but in terms of hobbies, what used to be my hobby was real estate, was fixing up properties, and so I feel very fortunate to have that sort of second career. But it's not all profit driven. Mm-hmm. So I have the luxury.
Here.
It is.
It's in
these projects have to be financially successful, but they're not bottom line. We do things that don't make a lot of sense financially, that are more driven by aesthetics and long-term goals.
My last question is, what's next? Can you?
We just met last week with the architects. We've had the next site for development is from Clinton and Burlington down to West Bank. Mm-hmm. And possibly including West Bank. They're interested in, I think, not owning real estate, but having a bank downtown. So it would either be down to West Bank or all the way down to Dubuque Street. And we just started the concept sort of thinking with the architects. What I told them is I don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over. So in terms of uses, it'll be a mixed use of commercial and residential, but in terms of design, I want to really explore some options.
Well, we will look forward to seeing what your creative mind and your partners do with that property. Marc, thanks so much for being my guest.
Thank you. This is fun.
This was fun. My guest on One of a Kind has been developer Marc Moen. Words used to describe Marc are visionary, positive, helpful, incredibly fit, and very, very kind. Marc Moen is one of a kind.